Okay. Hi, Toko-pa. Welcome to the Explorer Poet podcast.
Thanks, Josh. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. You just have such a big, I don't know, you have this story, this life history, but you also have been very prolific in your creations. And so a lot of different things that strike my fancy that I get interested about. But on your website, just to start out, on your website, it says that you're an author, a mystic, a speaker, a dream worker, and a teacher. And then there's I don't know if you wrote this or somebody wrote for your website, but it says, sometimes called a midwife of the psyche, Toko-pa's work focuses on restoring the feminine, reconciling paradox, and facilitating grief and ritual practice. And so there's all these different things that you work on and that you do. And my first question is just, what do you feel like is the connecting thread between all these things that makes it interesting to you, that makes you feel like this is the work you want to put yourself into?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, the word mysticism is kind of tricky, right? Because I think we often associate mystics throughout history as being these singular characters who have, channeled divine wisdom and have made it to our history books in some way or another. But I really think of mysticism as a way of seeking wisdom within, so turning inwards. And this is something I think any of us can participate in. And so when it comes to all of the things that I do, whether it's doing dream work or as a writer, as navigating those landscapes of grief and ritual, all of that sort of falls under the heading of what you might call mysticism. It's about having a relationship with soul, not just at the level of the self, but the anima mundi, which is the world soul, that there is a larger organizing intelligence or animating principle behind the visible surface of things. And that's what I am always striving to be in conversation with in everything that I do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Soul being it's the way that you phrased it is something behind everything, or something that exists beyond what's visible. One of the things that you put in here, or that I had read from your website as well, is this idea of paradox. And I think about paradox a lot because I think it's because I came from a world that was very literal, very from a religious perspective. And it was like, there weren't a lot of paradoxes in my life. It was like they had been chased away. But this is something I want to dwell on for a little bit with you and just get your thoughts. When you say reconciling paradox, what is this reconciliation, and what are the paradoxes that you think, or that you see? What are the things that come up when it comes to paradox?
Well, yeah, I think your story is very relatable because, while some people might have grown up in the religious world and other people grown up in the secular world, either way, there's a kind of fundamentalism which usually sees the world in very literal, concrete terms. But the truth is, there is this whole other half of life, which some people call the symbolic dimension, other people call the imaginal world, and some people call the world of soul, the dreaming, all kinds of words that we have for that other dimension. And so when I talk about reconciling, it's a way of holding the tensions between those two perspectives, those two attentions, so that a third thing can emerge, and that third thing is say a unity which contains the bothness of those two things. So it's not a way of eliminating their differences, but a way of holding them both within a third perspective, if that makes sense. So, of course, we see paradox all over the place. We see it in all kinds of opposition, that instead of choosing either or, that it's possible to contain a perspective which holds the validity of both. And so it's not as if there's one example of paradox which I think needs to be highlighted. It's that paradox is a kind of capacity in each of us. And as we grow that capacity to hold complex and differing perspectives, that it enhances us. It enhances us in a sense of we become more tolerant for different kinds of perspectives. We become more capable of even finding peace within our relationships, but also internally with those warring and conflicting parts of our own nature. So on all of those levels, I think paradox can be very helpful. And when we work with dreams, we often see so many examples of opposing forces battling each other. And so I think what's really being asked of us is not to have any one bias favoring one side over the other, but being able to contain both, making room in ourselves to contain both.
Yeah, I can really resonate with that, because again, going back to this world where I come from, it seems like maybe it's a Western world thing, because you pointed out that it's both in the religions and in the secular world in our West. But this idea that there's this side and there's this side, or there's good and there's bad. And it's a very Jungian idea, as at least in the Western world, is where I see that come up a lot, is that, oh no, we're neither good nor bad. We're both. And to be a child it's almost to see things as, you need to be able to see what's light and what's dark, what's good and what's bad, what's safe and what's dangerous. But then almost the way that I think about it is, as I get older, and kind of to the way that you were speaking, is as you can hold two ideas simultaneously and be okay with that, you can manage whatever that emotional discomfort is, or that dissonance is that you sit with. As you can do that, it's almost the process of growing up to mature, or, from a Jungian perspective, perhaps to individuate. But paradox is something that when you first encounter it can be very scary, especially coming from, well, part of it is because it is like growing up. And as much as maybe we don't always acknowledge it, the simple process of going from being a child to being an adult is actually a really scary process. And then if you come from a fundamentalist perspective, whether it's secular or religion, to hold two things as true is almost almost seems like an impossibility. And so to overcome that, it could be very scary.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. And I think we are a culture which is very much addicted to certainty. We like having a clear bottom line. We like being able to say, this is correct and this is incorrect. And that gives us a sense of safety. But it's an illusory form of safety, because that is not how the world works. The world is incredibly complex, and nature is full of that paradoxical quality. And so I like your perspective about maturation, that it's a process of becoming mature to be able to not just pick a side, but be able to see two sides at once. Because I do think that it matures us in a sense. But it is, I'm interested to hear more about why that's scary for you, or why you think that is frightening for us to mature into.
Yeah, I think if I think about it from a child to an adult perspective, that growth process, I think it's scary because as a child, you almost want absolute answers. you know, if you have a question, you want to go to an adult that's in your environment and you want them to be able to give you the answer. And a lot of times adults will just give an answer. And I mean, I think everybody probably has this experience where they grew up with these ideas that they just offhand comments from their parents about the way things are and how things work. And then you grow up and you actually experience life and you realize, whoa, that's not at all how it actually works. And so to be a child and to not receive that type of an answer can be very uncomfortable, because then you don't know how to be, you don't know how to act given a certain environment, a certain situation. And yeah, from a maybe from a religious perspective, it's kind of the same process of when you have questions, the religion or the dogma of the religion gives you very specific answers to those questions. And then to grow up and realize that those answers may not be true, or may be true, but not in a literal sense, more perhaps like a mystical or psychological sense, then it kind of is this, it's this feeling of maybe losing some structure or losing some architecture upon which you've based a lot of your identity and a lot of your decisions and, you know, the way you've oriented your life as far as goals. And so when that starts to crumble at the bottom, all these things above it start to feel more heavy and a little bit more uncertain. So I think that's that fear. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading this study in a book by Rollo May from the 60s, late 60s, something like that. And he was referencing this study that they did on anxiety and how they had studied this group of women. A portion of them had stable parenting, but the other portion had abandoning mothers. No, sorry, I have this wrong. Half of them had mothers who outrightly abandoned them, and the other half had mothers who were emotionally abandoning and yet stayed with them or gave them those mixed messages, right? And what they discovered was that in the women who had mothers who gave them those mixed messages, they had much higher levels of anxiety than those who were outrightly abandoned. And I remember being fascinated by that for decades, because it conveyed this idea that so much of the anxiety that we have has to do with this paradox, right? This bothness where it's neither this and it's neither that. And so a lot of the anxiety I think we experience in modernity has to do with not being able to come to terms with conflicting ideas, which is just a really interesting way of thinking about anxiety, because I think for most of us, when we turn inward, we'll discover that the reason that we're feeling anxious about something is because we're of two minds about a thing. And those, or at least two minds about a thing. So I think if we can develop this capacity to, I don't know, just tolerate the anxiety of that complexity, we can get better at it, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's something to be said about this modern world that we live in, where we want everything to be so scientific and we want everything to be so empirical with data driven and all this. But there's so many instances where simply doing that, it kind of stifles or removes this part of us that is not that thing. We're this other side. You could call it the more, I don't know, the more animalistic side. You could call it more spiritual side or mystical side. But there's a part of us as humans where we've lived a long period of our evolution in a state of kind of dreamlike fantasy. And that's what we know. And that's what we connect with much more strongly than data. And the world is split between those two things. And I wanted to get to asking you about your experience with Carl Jung and how you came across Jung and all this. But this is just something that he really struggled with himself, was how to reconcile the scientist that he wanted to be with this spiritual or human experience that he was having and that he could see everybody was having. And there is this tension just between those two things in this world. but yeah, maybe that's a good way to segue into a little bit about your history and just bringing up Carl Jung. There's actually two things I wanted to ask you about. So first is the Jung stuff, or second, it doesn't really matter. But then the other thing is just you have this background in Sufism, and I'm just curious if you don't mind if we jump into those topics.
Yeah, of course. Where to start? Just pull on any thread, I guess.
Yeah, well, maybe for those unacquainted with or not too acquainted with Sufism, what is it, and how does it work, and what is your experience, or like what's the how do you interact with this set of ideas yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was actually raised in a Sufi commune, what's called a khanqa, and um, it was in Montreal. So Sufism came to the West, I think, in the early 70s, if not late 60s, through the teachings of Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan. And but if you trace it to its origins, actually Sufism is a mystical branch of Islam. So similar to how Christianity has the Gnostic tradition, so sort of heretical spin-offs. um, so too is it with Islam. And so the Sufis are probably, most people relate to Sufism in modern times through Rumi, through the poetry of Rumi, who was a 13th century Persian poet and one of the first Sufis. And I love Rumi's story because, he sort of came to his mystical understanding of things through great contemplation of the teachers that came before him, but also through his own grief. And so he had a beloved partner, Shams of Tabriz, who ended up being murdered by his followers. And when he died, Rumi was in such profound grief that he circled this pillar in the courtyard where he was, and in his grief he just circled and circled, and as he grieved, this poetry kind of tumbled down through him. And so what we read as Rumi's poems are actually transcriptions of what his followers were writing down as this poetry was coming through him. And so Sufism, I mean, very hard to sum up because it's a whole different cosmology than anything we are familiar with in the West. But we could say it's a kind of layered cosmology. There's a threefold cosmos. The physical reality is not understood as one-dimensional. Beyond the physical, just beyond the physical, is what we now call the imaginal, alam al-mithal, which is an intermediate dimension or an intermediate reality between the physical world and the world of the divine. So that would be the third dimension. And so the Sufis believe that through contemplative practices, including turning, like the dervishes, through singing the names of God, through the contemplation of sacred scripture, that you can enter into this imaginal dimension, and also through our dreams, and encounter divine forces. And so there's a lot of crossover in the Jungian world to a Sufi way of thinking of existence. In fact, there's a lot of crossover in many different animistic traditions, in indigenous traditions especially. This idea that the physical world has a dimension behind it, and that it's alive, and that it has a soul, and that there's an order to it. There's an order written into the nature of life. And we can come into a relationship with it by participating with that world in various ways. And so I grew up with Sufism, but I didn't really discover Jung until probably I was about maybe 19 years old, something like that. And I found the book Man and His Symbols in a second-hand bookstore. And I just felt like these people were speaking. So for people who don't know that book, there's a chapter by Jung, but then there's a bunch of chapters by various colleagues of Jung at the time. And I really felt like I discovered people who were speaking my soul language, this that I had never heard spoken before. And so that sort of set me out on a path of becoming very deeply interested in Jungian psychology, which I've kept up for a long time since then.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, with that book, Man and His Symbols, my brother-in-law, who's a teacher, happened upon it at a school, and it was old, and they were going to discard this pile of books, and he saw it, and he's like, "Oh, this is the kind of thing Josh would read." So I have a copy of it that's like, it's this big one, with like the hardback, and I've read it probably 3 times in the last 3 years because I feel the same way. It's why I reach out to people like you, is because there's like this language, and then once you discover it, the whole world kind of opens up to you. And the symbols, and then the stories, and then how you see everybody interacting with them, how you interact with them yourself. But connecting that to Sufism is really interesting, because even these different worlds you talk about, you mentioned 3 of them. The purpose of my podcast, or kind of like the stated goal of my podcast, is to explore this blurry line between our physical worlds and our abstract realities. So that's like that physical interaction with matter, or whatever this is, and then the abstractions that we place into the world. And then we almost live more by the abstractions than we do by the physical things that we encounter. And yeah, for somebody like you to pick up a book, to grow up in that environment, and then to pick up a book like Jung and all of a sudden have a language, it's like a modern language of analysis and experience that speaks to these 2 things. It's yeah, I could see how that could capture you, because it's captured me as well.
Yeah, and you sort of alluded to earlier how Jung himself struggled with, maybe we could call it the supremacy of rationalism in his own psyche, which makes sense because at the time he was a pioneer of psychology and was really trying to establish it as a legitimate science in the context of rationalism. So in order to speak about things like the psyche, a lot of the wilder stuff that he was experiencing, he was putting into places like the Red Book and his Black Books, and all of that stuff was really hidden away from his professional life. So in the course of his lifetime, he never really came to terms with reconciling those 2 worlds. But this piece around rationalism is something all of us have to struggle with, because that's the context we've been raised in and are embedded in for the last 2,000 years or longer. And so I call myself a sort of practicing animist, because as much as I would have liked to have been raised with an animist perspective, the truth is I have so much unlearning and unarmoring to do of that very rationalistic, materialistic perspective, to get at a relationship, a participatory relationship with that divine wisdom that is animating the world. And for me, the entry point, the gateway, is through my own dreams. And I'm very blessed to have found a path working with dreams for so long and being in community and in relationship with other dreamers, because I see and witness the magic that pushes through ordinary reality into the physical world on a daily basis when people are working with their dreams.
Yeah, that's a great segue into dreams, because that's really what I wanted to talk to you about. And there's this quote, and I can't. Maybe you can help me remember where it was. But there's this quote from Carl Jung. It might have been in Man and His Symbols, but he basically said about dreams. He said, for no other reason, you should pay attention to your dreams because it makes life better, and or it just makes life go smoother or something like that. And I've just noticed that, for me personally, dealing with dreams, I've probably been really paying attention to my dreams for maybe the last 2 to 3 years. And there's just something about, if you wake up and you've had a dream and you just sit with it in the morning, you do a little meditation and you just sit with it and you try to remember it. There's something about it where even if you can't find all of the meanings, you can't place all of the symbols, for some reason, you just kind of go through the day in a different way, in a different mindset, where, I don't know, for somebody like me who I'm way over on the introverted side, trying really hard to become more extroverted just so that I can balance that out. There's something about being aware of my dreams that just lets me fall into life a little bit easier every day and just kind of experience it. But yeah, I'm really curious about dreams, and I want to ask you about, just from your perspective, when you talk to people, how do you describe what dreams are? Where do they come from? And what are their purpose? Maybe we could start with that. Where do dreams come from? What are they?
How much time do we have?
Take all the time you need.
I'm just kidding. I'm so happy for you that you've, started to develop this relationship with your dreams. And I loved what you're saying about, as an introvert, that somehow this practice of working with your dreams is allowing you to fall more easily into life. I almost, when you say that, I have the imagination of, how it allows you to bring the inner world into everyday living. I don't know if I have that right for you, but that's just the image that I'm sort of imagining.
Yeah, it's hard
like.
it's hard to put it into words, but it's that kind of experience where, it's like, there is something deeper guiding this whole day-to-day experience. And so it's okay to just, whatever comes up, you just kind of embrace that moment.
Yes, exactly. It's like you can start to see the symbolic dimension in this reality. And when that's okay, and when that's encouraged, it can make you feel safer and more interested instead of defensive against this, what can be a harsh world.
Yeah. And maybe it's even like what you were saying earlier about this, what this source of anxiety is having these two things conflicting. In a way, maybe it's just that, is just you bring the dream world and the waking world just a little bit closer together, and then there's not so much tension.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because we've been talking quite a bit about rationalism and science, which is really the myth of our time. But it is a kind of fundamentalism, and so most people think of dreams as originating in our brains, that our brains are performing some sort of neurological process. And I think this is a very silly notion. I think it's kind of like believing that the wardrobe itself is Narnia. It's like, we have this amazing access to this wellspring of archetypal energies and patterns, the patterning nature of the universe itself when we turn inward at night. And throughout the ages, it has been said that the divine speaks to us through our dreams. I mean, how many great dreams have there been in literally every single religious and spiritual tradition around the world? And most indigenous cultures center dreams as a matter of course in daily living, that we pay attention to our dreams, we talk about them, and they guide us as families, as societies, and as individuals. It's really only in what we could call Western civilization that we dismiss our dreams, or we reduce them to this idea of being sort of some neurological process. Now, I just want to say that it's not as if the brain isn't involved in dreaming, because I think the brain is involved in dreaming. We see that. We see activity in the brain. And it is a biological necessity, but it's not only that. And so what do I think dreams are? I mean, I just have a great deal of reverence for dreams. And I think there are different kinds of dreams. I think some dreams come out of different depths of psyche. Like we can have pretty shallow dreams about, say, ego stuff that we're sorting out in day-to-day living. But then we can have these numinous big dreams, which seem to be sort of intervening on ordinary reality to teach us important things. And those are dreams that change the course of your life. So I think, and then there's a wide range in between all of those. Sometimes we have dreams that are precognitive, which never stops being amazing to me. That information from what we call the future comes to us, is transmitted to us through our dreams. And then we have dreams that are like rehearsals for different skills and abilities. So it allows us to test out even creative ideas. So many of the world's greatest creations came out of dreams. So the creative process itself takes place in the imaginal sphere, which is where dreams emanate from. And so you see, like it's a vast. This capacity of dreaming is vast. So when you say, what does it mean, or like why do we dream? Why do we live? It's to me, the question is as vast as that, and ultimately unanswerable. We don't know. It's mysterious.
Yeah, it is mysterious. Yeah, it's just a part of the whole experience in a way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I do believe that there is a higher intelligence, and we see it in all of nature. What is it that inclines nature to bear fruit, to make beauty, to live in harmony and symbiosis with itself, with each other? What is that thing? We could call it God, we could call it nature, we could call it the intelligence of the cosmos. But there's obviously something much greater than we can perceive that is at work. And so one of the greatest things that Jung discovered about dreams is that they are that the images in our dreams evolve. So when we understand one image, the next image that we receive builds upon the understanding of the last image. And that goes on. So if you pay attention to a series of dreams, you see a natural evolution. And so the implications of this, this may seem really simple, but the implications are profound. It means that something in us knows where we're going and what we need to learn in the closest next step to get to that next step in our evolution and potential. Very similar to the analogy of DNA unfolding at a biological level, psyche also unfolds. And the other example of this would be, say, having a recurring dream. So when you have a recurring dream, it's sort of like getting stuck in a loop of a perspective that is not allowed to move forward. And so, if you have support in finally understanding what that recurring dream means, what the metaphor is, how to understand it in the context of your own evolving nature, the dreams will stop and they'll start to expand into new ground. So that's another example of what it can look like when that evolution stops or gets stuck on something that's a snag of some kind, a hitch in the plan.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I think about dreams as well. So there's Joseph Campbell has this idea of the cosmos, the macrocosm, the mesocosm, and the microcosm. So the macrocosm being the universe, and you were talking about some higher power, some higher intelligence, the divine, God, whatever it is that's beyond us, but we're a part of it, and beyond our ability to fully comprehend, but we still participate in it. And then this idea that you were sharing, that dreams have this precognitive ability where in a way there's some part of us that's already planned the story out, and the dreams are kind of revealing to us where we are in that path, or even sometimes they reveal something that's coming up ahead of us. Well, I tie all this together in this idea that humans as a species, we're this one thing, we're this giant entity. And we, what you were saying even before that was that all of these myths and stories, they came from somebody dreaming at some point way back when. And it seems as if the society as a whole is working in this same way, where we're playing out this dream. And the moment that we get to a point where we've got it, we figured it out, then the dream has to dissolve and it has to produce a new dream for us. And so it's like this cycle of, you see it as individuals going through the process of growing up, maturation, individuation. But on a broader scale, it seems as if the whole species is doing the same thing. And we see it's easier to see how the myths have grown and then passed away in older societies. And we almost just kind of look at them as if they were these societies or nation states or empires or whatever that rose and then fell. But it wasn't actually the group of people that rose and fell. It was more like the story rose and fell. And then because at some point, at some level, the people continue on, they just kind of become part of a different story. And in our modern day, I think this is what's really interesting about Jung's Red Book, is that I think it's actually I think this is my own personal opinion. And so it's, take it for what it is. But I think that Jung didn't want to publish the Red Book because he didn't want to be seen as a prophet. He didn't want to be seen as the person who was going to, because because by the time Nietzsche came around and wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra, that whole monotheistic idea had kind of gone full circle to where it was now this idea of a one single God was kind of falling away. And the Red Book is kind of a continuation of that. But what Carl Jung did in the Red Book was he actually provided the kind of the conclusive analysis of how that story ends with the Christian myth, with rather than Jesus dying on the cross for all of our sins, he gave it. It's if you read it psychologically or mystically, he just gave us the example of what we're all supposed to do ourselves. And when we do that, then all of a sudden we're in this state where, oh, we're godless. We have no God because we've achieved that dream. Like we've come full circle. And now there's this process of rebirthing the new God, or it's said in another way, there's this process of rebirthing the new story. So I don't know. I just went off, like I took that and went with it. But
I'm totally nerding out with you, and I think it's important to bring up Sophia, because I think a big part of what Jung was being confronted with in the Red Book was this feminine image, which has been excluded from Christianity, but which in the much older cultures was revered. And part of what we have been missing is this, the divine feminine which is difficult language in a post-gender kind of modern world, where, we hear these words and it brings all kinds of stuff for us. But I think the same was true for Jung. He really had a lot of sexism that he lived with, and he struggled with the feminine in its embodied form in his life. And he also struggled with giving it reverence in his own spirituality. And we see some of that battle in the Black and Red books as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In a way, it's, if you read any myth or any religion literally, it becomes these kind of, like we were talking about before, fundamentalist or dualistic kind of opposing things. But it read in almost in any way, mystically or psychologically, it seems like it's all about bringing these things together, or finding some kind of balance. And yeah, I think that was a big part of what he was trying to do as well, and why there was so much pain and suffering, because the collective is so, it seems like the overall collective is pretty against this idea of balance. And so to do that as an individual, it's got to be very painful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As it is for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah. It's in a way, I guess it's kind of similar to accepting that these paradoxes exist, that two truths, could be there. Let me ask you, when it comes to dream work, either working with other people or even maybe more interesting is in your own life, what is the process of dream work look like for you? How do you take note of your dreams, and, are you sitting with them and thinking about them? Are you writing them down? Like, what's the actual process that you go through when it comes to sitting with your dreams and working with them?
Yeah, so the approach that I take with myself is different and also similar to how I work with other people. So when I'm working with an individual or working within a group, a dream group, um, I came up with this term for what I do, and I call it courtship, courting the dream. And I use this term because I love this old timey idea, that if you felt affectionate or attraction for someone, that you would circle them, circumambulate and look at them from a distance and try to discover what it is that they want and what it is that they need, and then strive somehow to provide it to them in the hopes that they may come a little closer to you. And it's a beautiful word, and it's a beautiful idea that I think we've lost in the swipe left, culture of now. But so I treat dreams in this way. I think we really, in a lot of the dreaming traditions where we have dream dictionaries, and we want to just kind of get to the bottom line of dream and look up the solution in a dream dictionary, this is pretty rubbish, and it doesn't usually help at all. There are very few good dream dictionaries out there. There may be one or two, but that's because symbols are not static. They are living, breathing beings that are constantly in flux and changing, and they're so specific to their relationship to us and our personal history. So courtship, when it comes to dreams, is a process of discovering what the dream wants instead of what I can acquire from it. So often we have a dream and we say, well, what does it mean for me? Like we treat it a little bit like a vending machine. We want some kind of answer to a problem, or we want guidance in a difficult moment. But actually, I think it's quite different when we start thinking holistically that psyche is part of a kind of much larger ecosystem. You were sort of talking about how humanity has this collective story. I think we can expand that beyond the human world into, the whole living ecosystem. And so our dreams are part of that, we could say, psychic ecosystem. And there's something that is asking us to learn something, to expand our perspective, to evolve our attitudes, especially when they are too one-sided. And so, sorry, this is a roundabout answer to your question, but I'm just trying to provide a little bit of context for how I approach dreams, and then I'll tell you how I do it practically after that. So dream work, as I see it, is an effort to discover what the dream wants, what the dream is longing for. And the way that I do this is mainly through curiosity, through suspending the urge to know, suspending the urge to decide or to understand, and instead develop the art of asking good questions. And so when you ask, why did this particular figure show up in my dreams? What are they like? How do they seem in the dream? What do they need? What else was happening? How do I feel about this environment? Have I been to this place before? What does it remind me of? Things like this, these kind of questions which can draw wisdom out of the symbols. And in this process, magically, connections are made between what's happening in the dream symbolically and through the metaphor to what is happening in our waking lives and in the culture. And these connections often happen spontaneously, but there are also tools that we can learn to make those bridges more visible. So when I'm working with my own dreams, I write down my dreams, and then I will ask myself questions or ask the dream questions in a kind of active imagination. What characteristics, what attributes, what longing the images have for me. And somehow a picture develops out of that. But when I'm working with another person, usually we're just having it. It's very conversational. I try to put myself in the dreamer's shoes, and I ask, what does this mean for you? And what was this experience like? And what can you tell me about this person? And how did you feel in this moment? And then I'll try to bridge and reflect those answers back to the dreamer in a way that it could connect for them back to things that might be happening for them in waking life. And this is the sort of bridging between the two worlds. And then there's a sort of a synthesizing process that we do where, all these questions can make the dream sort of expand in this very detailed way, but then we have to sort of coalesce afterwards and be able to determine what are the most important pieces of wisdom that have come out of that exploration, which is the synthesizing process.
Yeah, it's a really fun experience when you're doing that, either for yourself or with somebody else, where you're just sitting with it and you're asking yourself about, what was the setting and what was happening there and what did I feel, and you just ask the questions, and then that synthesizing or that like connection, especially when you're working. I've just recently started participating in a dream group, and when you're working with other people, and sometimes I do this with my friends, or even I talk about dreams a lot with my kids. And when you see that connection, like you see it all kind of click into place, and there's a recognition, you can tell that it's both like in their head, but also in their body, where there's just this like, oh, and it almost sends like tingles over my skin just when I see it happen or when I experience it, because it's so powerful in a way, because it really is connecting these two different worlds. And the interesting thing about it is that there's often this message that's shocking to you. You know, it's either because it was so pertinent or so important for you, or because you just never could have seen that message coming up from inside yourself. And that feeling is just, it's pretty powerful. It's moving.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of hard to talk about doing it, but it's very easy to do it. Easy in the sense that, once you have some basic, simple tools, I mean, you imagine people have been doing this since the beginning of time, talking about their dreams. That's really all you have to do, is just talk about them and ask each other questions. And something will always come out of it if people are interested enough and curious enough. But I love what you say about how you can get it at different levels, and you've really gotten it when your body feels that deep resonance, and you're like, oh, something clicks into place where you see things in a way that you hadn't been seeing them. And that's what ultimately the dream, I think, provides, is this expansive perspective. I think all of my greatest learning has come out of my own dreams, which is very humbling and can be very challenging too, because they often go against the grain of culture, and what we're taught to value.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you, when you, I'm sure you've had an experience where you're working with somebody, and I never want to, and I would imagine that you agree, but I would never want to tell somebody what their dream means, because it needs to kind of emerge through them, and they need to feel it in order to really, if they don't feel that, it's not, either we haven't landed on the right thing, or maybe there's some resistance to the message of the dream, or the potential that the dream could carry some kind of a truth. And I'm curious if you have, I'm sure in your work with this, you've encountered people who they're right on the cusp of grasping the dream, but they don't want to make that emotional connection or something, because maybe it's scary. Maybe it just seems a little too woo-woo for them or something. But is there a question that you like to ask, or just a way to help people kind of accept their own, so they can get past that resistance?
I think it would sort of depend on the situation. In general, I respect the resistance, because, I think we're ready for things when we're ready for things, and there's really no sense in rushing it. If somebody is mounting resistance, there's a good reason for it. In the same way that when people experience trauma, they might parcel off the experience into a compartment that they don't access for a long time. It may be that what needs unpacking there eventually has to be done slowly, or else it can be fracturing or splintering to the personality. So I think it's really important to respect resistance. And I'm so glad that you have this perspective about gentling your way with a dream, because I think that takes a lot of wisdom to get that peace. I think a lot of people want to just get in there with the analyzer and say, it means this and that and this and this, and you can get really analytical with a dream. But you're right, it has absolutely no worth or value when you get something intellectually. I mean, you probably have had this experience when you've gotten something intellectually 10 years ago, but you didn't get it in your bones and in your emotions until 10 years later. And so that's interesting how we do that. And I think it makes much more sense to allow the thing to be integrated on its own time. So I wouldn't pressure somebody if they are, I don't know, on the cusp. What's an amazing thing is people know much more than you think they know. And if you can just hold space and presence for their knowing, they'll often see the mirror, even though it may not appear that way on the outside. They'll get it, and maybe on their own time. They may just not want to touch it in front of you, but when they go home, they'll take it out of their pocket and be like, "Ooh, that was a strong mirror."
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I love the idea of respect because, yeah, I guess dreams, in a way, dreams are the same as any kind of psychological process or maturation process, healing of trauma, whatever it is. It's everybody's just doing it at their own time frame, and a lot of times it's not even a conscious time frame. Obviously, it's just something that they've got to. It's a process. We're all these human processes that we never really achieve like this state of just being something. We're always kind of, there's always something to move forward, and you can't necessarily hurry anybody up. You can hardly even hurry up yourself. So I like the idea of having respect for that. Yeah. I want to give you a chance to talk about your dream school as well, because you've got a ton of resources online and you do different types of dream workshops and dream, lectures, and there's all sorts of things that people can access. You've been doing this dream school for, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been doing it for over 20 years now, right? And yeah, so I just want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more specifically about the dream school itself and what people might find in the school and how they might benefit from it.
Yeah, for sure. So I like to teach people, give people tools to work with their own dreams and then work with others in groups and in pairs and even professionally with dreams. And so Dream School has, I founded Dream School in 2001. And back in those days, that was pretty much before the internet was a big thing. So we did a lot of Dream School in-person gatherings, and now Dream School is both online and physical. And so I do a number of things. I have some digital courses that you can do self-study. And then I host live groups where we work with dreams called the Dream Lodge. I do those a couple of times a year. And then I have like an annual retreat where we get together for 5 days and just spend time talking about and working with our dreams. And and then I, give talks and things like that. I've been working on my second book for the last few years, so I haven't been doing as much actively in the community as previously I had been. But once the book is out, I'll be able to do much more.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, I have a mailing list, and that's the best way when I occasionally use it, which is probably not as often as I should. I tell people about what's going on.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, we just have a few minutes left. And so the hour goes by really fast, and we didn't get to the book that you released a couple years ago, Belonging. But do you want to take a minute and talk just about this book that you're working on related to dreams, or is that something best left for a future event?
Yeah, well, so belonging, remembering ourselves home is my first book, and that book is about dreams, and it's also part memoir. And it's also got a lot of mythology and exploration in it. And really, the book is about the search for belonging and the kind of like epidemic alienation that we find ourselves in modern times. And so in that book, I seek to try and understand, why do so many of us feel like an outsider? Why do we feel like we don't belong? And then I try to show that there are these ways that we can reconnect and recreate belonging as a set of competencies or skills instead of looking for it on the outside of ourselves. And primarily, I think, through dreams. So that book is also about dreams, but in a sort of through a different lens, the lens of the quest for belonging. And the next book is entirely about dreams, and that'll be out in a few months, probably in the autumn of 2024. And it's called The Dreaming Way. And so I'm excited to share that. That'll be a culmination of my work with dreams over the last couple of decades.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, this idea of just going back to belonging and how you said we live in this alien state kind of where everybody does feel, maybe I don't want to say everybody, but a lot of people do feel this sense of not belonging. And it's connected to this whole conversation about Carl Jung and the cycle of myths, and then turning inward to our dreams. It seems like we've reached a point in history where we've all become we're supposed to be individuals. We're actually supposed to stand separate from all these groups. And rather than participate in them wholesale, it's as if we're supposed to turn inward and find kind of common ground, commonality, some kind of shared sense of existence or reality, but by doing it in this new way, which turns out to be a very old way. But yeah, I find it fascinating. And I think that people like you who spend so much time, having spent so much time turning inward and discovering so many things, like these truths that you say you've discovered through your dreams, it may be painful or difficult to communicate them to the collective. It may be difficult to share them, but I think it's really valuable for this future evolution of all of us together, that people like you are willing to tolerate that pain or that discomfort, or, sit in that and then be that mouthpiece for this kind of wisdom that's always been there, but we always have to rediscover it. So I think that what you're doing is fantastic. And yeah, I just really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. And when your new book, The Dreaming Way, comes out this fall, I would love to have you come back and come tell me about it.
Yeah, that would be great, Josh. And thank you also for having this conversation about the bridge between the two worlds with all of the people that you do. I think this new story that we're building as a species needs all of us and all of our unique perspectives in order to bring it about. So it's all hands on deck.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I think it's like a fantastic journey, and we all just get to play a little part in it. It's kind of a magical little thing about life. Okay, where if people want to find you, just so that we don't leave without saying it, where can people find you? Website, social media? Are you on YouTube? Anything like that?
So my website is Toko-pa.com. So it's Toko-pa.com, Toko-pa.com. And I spend probably the most active social media is Facebook and Instagram, and I'm easy to find on both because I have a unique name. So it's just Toko-pa. And I have a little bit of stuff on YouTube, but I have to say, I don't love being on camera. So I don't do a lot of that. I'd rather just put the words out there and let the poetry do its work. But yeah, so those are the places where if I'm doing anything in the social world, they'll be there. So yeah, okay. Come join us for my mailing list if you want to hear more. And okay. Yeah, let's stay in touch, and I'll definitely come back and we'll talk more dreams and imagination.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. And I'll link all this, your website and stuff on the show notes as well, so people will be able to just click on them. But okay, thank you so much, Toko-pa. I really enjoyed this, and I do hope that we could do it again sometime.